Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight we are sitting with an image from the Tao Te Ching, known in the West as the Tao Te Ching, that turns upside down almost everything we have been taught about strength and significance. Lao Tzu wrote about the valley spirit, the low place that never dies, because its very lowness is what draws everything toward it. Rain falls into the valley, rivers find their way down to it, creatures gather at its edge. Nothing seeks the peak except the wind. The teaching is this: we are raised to rise, to stand out, to be visible from a distance. The peak is what we are pointed toward, the highest achievement, the most distinguished position, the place from which we can see everything and be seen by all. And yet Lao Tzu pointed at the valley and said, this is where the power is, not the power of elevation, which must be defended and can be lost. The power of reception, which is only deepened by what it receives and which cannot be taken away because it is not a position at all. It is a shape. Humility in this teaching is not smallness. It is not the hunched apology of someone who does not believe they deserve to take up space. It is the valley's shape, the open, low, receptive quality that allows everything else to arrive. Nothing flows toward what refuses to receive. The valley does not work to gather the rain, it simply stays low. Tonight we will follow this image through 13 chapters, through 13 traditions, each of which has, in its own voice, arrived at the same recognition that the most genuinely powerful quality in a life is not what rises above, but what stays open enough to receive what is trying to reach it. You do not need to know anything about Taoist philosophy to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever suspected that the relentless rising, the constant maintenance of height and visibility was costing something that cannot easily be named. And who has wondered if there was a quieter, lower, more enduring way to be? Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here. Only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. The valley is not somewhere you need to travel to. It is the quality of the low, still, open place. And that place is always here, in you, waiting to be returned to. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. Lao Tzu opened the 6th chapter of the Tao Te Ching with 3 words that have occupied translators for centuries. Gushambu Si, the valley spirit does not die. He was not referring to a literal spirit or a literal valley exactly. He was pointing at a quality, the quality of the low place, the quality of the container that stays open, the quality of what receives without condition. The valley does not die because it has nothing to protect. The mountain has height, it can be eroded. The tree has growth, it can be cut. The fire has heat, it can be extinguished. But the valley's defining quality is the absence of the thing that can be taken. Its lowness cannot be removed. Its emptiness is what it is, and so it endures. This is the first and most fundamental form of the teaching. What endures is not what rises, but what receives. And what makes receiving possible is a particular quality of lowness. Not the lowness of defeat, not the lowness of shame, but the lowness of the bowl that can be filled because it is not already full of itself. Most of us have learned the opposite. We have learned to fill ourselves with knowledge, with opinion, with the accumulated proof of our own substance. And in the filling, we have made ourselves less receivable. The full bowl cannot take in what is offered to it. The valley that has built itself a floor cannot collect the water that tries to arrive. Tonight's question is simple, and not simple at all. What would it take to stay low enough to receive what is trying to reach you? There was once a young dervish who wanted his teacher to know how far he had come. He had been studying and practicing for several years, and the work had been genuine, not the performance of practice, but the actual thing, the daily sitting, the sincere effort of a person who wanted to understand what he had set out to understand. He had arrived at certain realizations that seemed to him like genuine advances. He wanted the teacher to know about them, not from vanity exactly, from the understandable desire to be seen in the place where he actually was, rather than where he had been. He arranged his thoughts carefully and came to the teacher's room one afternoon. The teacher was sitting with tea, and he gestured for the young dervish to sit and poured him a cup. The young dervish began to speak. He described his recent practice, what he had come to understand, the particular quality of the understanding, and why it seemed to him significant. He spoke at some length. The teacher listened, or appeared to listen, and continued to pour tea. The young dervish, still speaking, noticed that the tea had risen to the brim of his cup and was now beginning to overflow. "Teacher," he said, interrupting himself, "the cup is full, the tea is spilling." "Yes," the teacher said, still pouring. The young dervish stared at him. "Why are you still pouring?" he asked. The teacher set the pot down. He looked at the cup, overfull, tea pooling in the saucer. Then he looked at the young dervish. "You came to tell me what you have understood," the teacher said. "And what you have understood is real, and the work that produced it is real. I am not disputing any of it." He paused. "But you arrived here already full. There was no room in the cup for anything I might have offered." The young dervish was quiet. He looked at his tea. "I wasn't asking you to teach me," he said. "I was telling you what I had found." "Yes," the teacher said, "and that is exactly it. You came to pour, not to receive, which is understandable. You have been doing good work and you wanted it witnessed. But the desire to pour and the desire to receive are different, and the cup that is busy pouring cannot simultaneously receive." He looked at the young dervish with something that was not unkind. The valley does not announce the rain it has collected. It simply receives the next rain. The young dervish sat with this for a while. "So I am supposed to not share what I have found?" he said. "Keep it to myself?" "I am not asking you to keep it to yourself," the teacher said. "I am asking you to notice whether the desire to share it has made room for something else to arrive, or whether it has filled the space that something else was trying to enter." He poured fresh tea into an empty cup. "This cup was ready for tea. The one in your hand was not. The difference was not the quality of the cup. It was the state of the cup when the tea arrived." The young dervish looked at his full, overflowing cup. Then he looked at the empty one the teacher had poured. "What do I do with a full cup?" he asked. Empty it, the teacher said simply, not by dismissing what is in it. The tea is good tea, but by offering what you have so that the having releases and the space returns. He smiled. This is also called teaching. The teacher who gives what they have freely finds the cup empty again, ready. The young dervish returned to his practice with a different quality of attention. Not the attention of accumulating and then reporting, but the attention of noticing what was arriving and releasing it before the cup got full. It was, he found, a more demanding practice than the one he had been doing. Keeping the cup empty requires more continuous effort than filling it and maintaining the fullness. But the quality of what arrived was different. The teacher, he noticed, rarely spoke about his own understanding. He simply responded to whatever arrived. And in responding, he appeared to be at every moment exactly as full as the moment required, and exactly as empty as the next moment needed him to be. There was one afternoon, some months into this new practice, when the young dervish arrived at the teacher's room with nothing at all. No news of his progress, no questions he had been holding, no understanding that had arrived and was waiting to be reported. He simply came and sat, and the teacher poured tea, and the two of them were quiet together for a long time. And in the quiet, something arrived in the young dervish that he could not name. Not a teaching, not an insight with edges and a direction. More like a quality of presence that filled him the way warmth fills a room when a fire is lit. Not as information, but as a change in the texture of everything. He was not sure where it came from or what to call it. He only knew that it was there, and that it had not been able to arrive before in all the months of his reporting and demonstrating, because there had been no room. He thought about telling the teacher. Then he did not. He left the room with the quality still in him, unnamed, held lightly. The teacher, as he left, said nothing. But there was something in his expression that the young dervish recognized as the expression of a teacher who has seen something arrive. In Sufi tradition, the image of the cup and the pouring is not incidental. It is central to the understanding of how genuine spiritual knowledge arrives and what prevents it from arriving. The great Sufi teachers described the state of true receptivity with a specific Arabic word, fakr, spiritual poverty, the condition of being genuinely empty. Not empty as lack, but empty as readiness. The dervish who has arrived at fakr has released the accumulated weight of their own opinions, their own spiritual achievements, their own sense of having understood. Not because these things were wrong, the understanding was real, but because the clinging to what has been understood is exactly what prevents the next understanding from entering. Rumi used the image of the flute, the reed that was cut from the reed bed and cries from its emptiness. The flute's power is not in the wood, but in the hollow. Fill the hollow, and the flute no longer sings. The reed that was once only wood becomes, in its emptiness, the instrument through which the whole of longing and beauty can be expressed. What makes the song is not what is there, but what has been removed. There is also in Sufi teaching the concept of istiqama, straightness, uprightness, the quality of being aligned with what is genuinely coming from the divine rather than what is being generated from the small self. And istikama, in many teachers' understanding, requires exactly the emptying the teacher was describing, the constant releasing of what has been accumulated, so that the alignment is with what is arriving rather than with what has already arrived and been collected. The young dervish's lesson that the full cup cannot receive is the Sufi lesson in its most practical daily form. Think about the places in your life where the cup is full and you have been trying, without noticing, to pour more in. The conversation where you arrive with what you already know rather than genuine curiosity about what the other person carries. The meeting where your position is formed before the first word is spoken. The relationship where you have spent so long in one quality of relating to someone that you no longer see who they actually are now, only who you have been in relationship with. In all of these, the cup arrived full, and the fullness was not wrong. What is in the cup is real and earned and genuinely yours. But when the cup is full, it cannot receive, and what it cannot receive is often exactly what it needs in order to grow. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the conversation with someone you love, where you stop listening at the point where you think you know what they are going to say, and the specific, deflating discovery that what they actually said was different, and that you missed it, not because you weren't paying attention, but because your attention was ahead of the conversation rather than in it. You may have felt this yourself in the particular quality of a conversation when your cup was genuinely empty, when for some reason you had no position to defend, no understanding to maintain, no expectation about what was coming, and how completely different the other person appeared, and how much more they said, and how much you received. Right now, in this breath, the cup can be empty. The night asks nothing of you except to receive the rest that is trying to arrive. The valley does not work. It stays low, and what is low enough receives everything. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu was interested in the relationship between height and knowledge. Specifically, the observation that the highest position often provides the least genuine understanding of what is actually happening below. The ruler who governs from a great height may know the landscape in its broad outlines, but the person in the valley knows the specific texture of the ground, the quality of the soil, the precise direction of the wind at first light. The overview is real, but the knowledge of the place is in the place itself, not in what can be seen from above it. This teaching appears repeatedly in the Tao Te Ching in the form of the sage who leads from behind, who speaks softly and is sought out rather than imposing themselves, who does not hold a high position and yet whose counsel is valued above that of those who do. The Taoist sage is not on the mountaintop. They are in the village, in the ordinary place, in the low position that everything passes through. The Lakota tradition has a specific and direct parallel to this teaching, in the distinction between the chief who stands apart to see and the elder who sits in the center of the gathering to hear. The one who stands apart has the overview. The one who sits in the center has the understanding of what the people actually carry, which is a deeper form of knowledge than anything the overview can provide. What flows toward the valley is not only water. Information flows to low places. Trust flows to low places. The quality of genuine knowing that comes from being the place where things arrive rather than the place from which things are surveyed. There was once a young chief who sat on the high hill. He had been leading his people for several years, and he had developed a habit that had begun with good intentions. Early in his leadership, when he was uncertain about many things, he had climbed to a prominent hill near the settlement to think, to see the whole landscape laid out before him, to feel the perspective that the height provided. From the hill he could see the fields, the paths, the river, the smoke from the fires, and the surrounding territory in all directions. The view helped him think. The thinking helped him decide. This seemed like an appropriate use of the position he had been given. But over time, the habit had shifted in a way he did not fully notice. He still climbed the hill to think, but increasingly he went there also when he did not want to be interrupted, when the complexity of the people's concerns felt too immediate and too particular, when what he needed was the distance of the long view rather than the closeness of what any specific person was bringing to him on any specific day. An elder in the community, a woman who had been advising his predecessors long before he was born, observed this shift. She said nothing about it for some time, but one afternoon she came to the hill and sat beside him. "You can see a great deal from here," she said. "Everything," the young chief said. "The whole of the territory." "What can you see of the people?" she asked. He gestured toward the settlement. "Their fires, their paths, the direction they are moving." "And their faces?" she asked. He was quiet. "Their words," she said, "what they say to each other when they think no one important is listening." "No," he admitted. "And who brings their concerns to you?" she asked. "Here, on the hill." He thought about it. "Those who climb the hill," he said. And as he said it, he heard what it meant. Those with the health and the urgency to climb, not the old, not the very young, not those who were too tired from the day's work to add the climb, not those who were reluctant to be seen seeking out the chief, which was its own category of important people with important things. "And at the gathering place," the elder said. She meant the flat ground at the center of the settlement, where people collected naturally in the evenings. "Who is there?" "Everyone," he said. "Yes," she said. "Everyone passes through the low place. They bring everything there, the news, the concerns, the ordinary talk that is not important enough to justify a climb, but that is also where the most important things are said, because they are said without ceremony." She looked at the landscape below them. "The hill is useful. What you see from here is real, but what you know from here is also limited. The hill knows the shape of things. The valley knows what they are made of." The young chief was quiet for a long time. "If I sit in the low place," he said, "the people will not see me as a chief. They will see me as one of them." "Yes," the elder said, "which is precisely what allows them to tell you things a chief cannot hear." He came down from the hill, not permanently. The hill had its uses, and the elder had not told him to abandon it. But he began to spend his evenings in the gathering place, simply present, unremarkable, listening to what passed through. And what passed through was not the formal petitions of the hill, but the texture of actual life, the small difficulties, the quiet worries, the things that would never be important enough to climb for, and that were, he gradually understood, exactly what the leadership of a people actually required him to understand. He made better decisions in the years that followed, not because he had more information, he had always had information, but because the information was now of a different quality. He understood not just the shape of things, but what they were made of. In Lakota tradition, the distinction between the knowledge of the high place and the knowledge of the center is embedded in the structure of leadership itself. The most respected leaders in the Lakota tradition were not those who stood apart and surveyed, but those who were most present to the actual experience of the people, who listened long before speaking, who did not declare the conclusion before hearing all that was being offered. The Lakota concept of wuhola, respect, reverence, the quality of genuine attention given to what another person carries, is expressed in the practice of counsel. In the counsel circle, the speaking goes slowly, with pauses between speakers, and no one interrupts. The quality of the listening is considered as important as the quality of the speaking. A leader who is known for genuine listening, who remembers what people said many seasons ago and connects it to what they are saying now, is a leader whose counsel is sought. There is also in Lakota teaching the concept of the hunka ceremony, the making of relatives, the formal acknowledgement that relationship is the ground of genuine knowledge. The person who knows another person's history, their sorrows, the names of their children, the specific weight of what they are carrying, that person knows something the overview cannot provide. And the leader who has this kind of knowing is a different kind of leader from the one who has only the overview. The young chief's discovery that the low place holds more than the high place about what the people actually are is this Lakota teaching in its most practical political form. Think about where in your life you have been seeking the high view when what was needed was the low one. The parent who manages the household from a distance, who has the overview of the schedule and the budget and the general direction of things, but who is not in the kitchen when the actual feelings of the children are expressed. The leader who reads the reports rather than walking the floor. The friend who knows, in the broad outlines, what you are going through, but who has not asked the specific, close question that would reveal what it actually feels like from the inside. The overview is not wrong. The high view is real and has real uses. But the high view is the view of shapes, and shapes are not the same as what they are made of. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific gap between what you know about a person and what you understand about them, between the accurate description and the genuine knowing. The accurate description can be assembled from the high place. The genuine knowing requires the low one. You may have felt this yourself in the particular moment of receiving someone's full, close attention. Not their assessment, not their advice, not their overview of your situation, but their actual presence in the specific detail of what you are carrying. and how different that was from the more common experience of being known about rather than known. Right now, in this breath, you are in the low place, not because you have descended from anywhere, because this is where you actually are, in the body, in the specific quality of this moment, in the unhurried detail of what the body is feeling. The overview can rest. The valley knows what this moment is made of. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not contend, and for this reason no one can contend with them. This is not a teaching about strategy, not the clever passivity of someone who refuses to compete in order to win by default. It is a teaching about the structure of genuine knowing, that the position which does not insist on itself is the position that cannot be dislodged, because it is not occupying a fixed point that can be targeted. When we insist on our own understanding, when we press it, defend it, stake out a territory around it, and guard the perimeter, we have given our understanding a shape that can be attacked. An argument that occupies a specific position has a specific boundary, and the boundary is the weak point. Everything that arrives at the boundary is met with defense rather than reception. But the understanding that does not insist has no boundary to attack. It is not located at a single fixed point. It is in genuine, continuous relationship with what is actually arriving, and it changes as what arrives changes, not because it has been defeated, but because it is alive. This is the valley's quality applied to thinking, not the fixed peak that can be eroded, but the open, low place that receives whatever arrives and is therefore never in a fixed position that can be attacked. The Stoic tradition noticed this from the angle of argument. The philosopher who argues least is often right most often, not because they have fewer opinions, but because their opinions are held with a quality of openness that allows them to be revised by genuine evidence rather than defended against it. There was once a young philosopher who wanted to be known for original thinking. He had good reason for the desire. His thinking was genuinely original, at least in part. He had arrived at some insights that the community of thinkers he moved in had not previously articulated, and he believed these insights were correct, and that their correctness was worth defending. He was not wrong about this. His insights were real. But he had developed a habit that followed him into every gathering. He arrived ready to argue, not aggressively. He was not a quarrelsome person, but with a specific quality of someone who has already decided what is true and is now present to find out whether others recognize it. His listening, when he listened, had the quality of listening for the weakness in what was being said rather than for what might be genuinely valuable. His teacher observed this for some time. One afternoon, the teacher sat with him and said, "Tell me what you have learned this month." The young philosopher described several things. They were all, the teacher noticed, formulations of positions the young philosopher already held, the month's new arguments for old conclusions. "And what has changed in your thinking?" the teacher asked. The young philosopher thought. "Refined," he said after a moment. "Not changed." "And what surprised you?" the teacher asked. A longer pause. "I'm not sure," he said. "When was the last time you were surprised by an idea?" the teacher asked. "Not persuaded, surprised. The specific quality of encountering something you had not anticipated, that went in a direction your thinking had not prepared for." The young philosopher thought carefully. He could not name a specific instance. "I think I have not been surprised in some time," he said. "Yes," the teacher said, "and this is the problem I am seeing, which is not a problem with the quality of your thinking. The thinking is good. The problem is with the quality of the listening that precedes the thinking." He paused. "You arrive in every conversation already knowing what is likely to be said and what the correct response to it is. And this means you are, in each conversation, largely in a dialogue with your own prior thinking, which has already anticipated the field. The new thinking in the room cannot reach you because the room, in your experience of it, is already populated by what you brought in." "So I should disagree more?" the young philosopher asked. "To stay open?" "No," the teacher said. "Disagreement is also a position, and positions are what close the thinking. I am asking you to arrive without a position, to sit in the low place, where the ideas flow down to you, rather than on the peak from which you survey the field." He looked at the young philosopher steadily. "The valley does not decide in advance what the rain should taste like. It simply receives the rain and is changed by it. The mountain, from which the rain falls, is not changed by the rain. The valley is." The young philosopher left that conversation with something unfamiliar, not a new conclusion, but an absence. The absence of the prepared response. He returned to the next gathering without his usual complement of formed positions, and he found the experience deeply disorienting at first. He had nothing ready. He was genuinely uncertain about several things he had thought he knew. But something in the gathering was different. He found himself following what was being said in a way he had not followed things in a long time. He found himself surprised. 3 times in the same afternoon he encountered something that took his thinking somewhere he had not been going, and the somewhere was more interesting than where he had been. He did not announce any conclusions that afternoon. He returned to his room and stayed with what had arrived, and when he next came to write, what he wrote was different from what he had been writing, not just refined, changed. Stoic philosophy holds at its center the practice of epoche, suspension of judgment, the deliberate withholding of a fixed conclusion while the inquiry continues. The Stoics recognized that most suffering and most error arose not from incorrect information, but from premature judgment, from the mind leaping to a conclusion before the information required to reach a correct conclusion had fully arrived. The great Stoic teacher Epictetus taught that we are troubled not by what happens to us, but by the judgments we make about what happens. And the practice of suspending judgment, of holding the assessment open a moment longer than feels comfortable, was understood as the primary practice of the philosophical life. Not skepticism, which denies the possibility of knowledge, but epoche, which simply acknowledges that the knowledge has not yet fully arrived and waits for it without anxiety. Marcus Aurelius applied this in his public life with specific discipline. In his private journals, he returned repeatedly to the practice of asking whether a given thing was genuinely bad, genuinely worthy of the judgment he was about to make, or whether the badness was in his interpretation of it. He was not trying to be optimistic. He was trying to be accurate. And accuracy, in his experience, required the suspension of the first judgment long enough for the thing itself to be properly seen. The young philosopher's discovery that arriving without a position allowed him to be surprised, and that surprise was where the genuine thinking lived, is this Stoic practice in its most intellectually honest form. The valley of the mind receives more than the mountain of the mind, because the valley's orientation is toward what is arriving. The mountain's orientation is toward what it already is. Think about where in your life you arrive with your conclusions already formed. The disagreements where you know what you think before you know what the other person is actually saying. The creative problems where you have already narrowed the possible solutions before you have genuinely opened the question. The relationships where the person across from you has been, for some time, encountered not as themselves, but as the person you have accumulated enough experience with to believe you know in advance. The positions are real. The conclusions are often correct, but the arriving with them is what prevents the revision that would make them more correct. The mind that is already at the answer cannot be surprised by the better answer. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of being wrong about something you were very confident about, and discovering in the wrongness that what had made you confident was the length of time you had held the position, not the quality of the evidence for it. Duration had masqueraded as depth. You may have felt this yourself in a conversation where you said less than you usually do, where, for some reason, you arrived with an open quality rather than a prepared one, and discovered that what came back to you was something you had not been carrying a moment before. The thinking in the room that entered you because you had not already filled that space. Right now, in this breath, there is nothing to argue. The night makes no claims that require your assessment. The body's slow heaviness is not a position to be evaluated. It is just what is arriving, and what is arriving into an empty valley does not need to be decided about. It only needs to be received. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage knows without speaking, accomplishes without effort, teaches without instruction. This sounds paradoxical until you understand the kind of teaching he meant. Not the teaching that fills the student with content, but the teaching that creates the conditions in which the student's own understanding can arise. The valley creates the conditions for rain to gather. It does not produce the rain. The most powerful form of teaching in the Taoist understanding is what is transmitted through presence rather than instruction, through the quality of the teacher's attention, the shape of the space they create, the specific quality of what is possible in their company. This is what we actually carry from our best teachers, not specific pieces of information, though these are real, but something about the quality of how they were in the world, which we absorbed through proximity, and which changed the quality of how we are in the world in ways we cannot fully trace. The full room cannot receive this transmission. Only the empty one can. And the student who fills every silence with a demonstration of their own understanding, who never allows the presence of the teacher to fill the space because the space is always already occupied, is the student from whom the most important teaching perpetually remains just out of reach. Hindu philosophy speaks of the quality of shraddha, deep listening, the quality of reception so complete that the teaching enters all the way in, not just into the intellect but into the bones. And shraddha requires the emptiness that allows this depth of reception. There was once a young student who always spoke first. This was not rudeness, it was eagerness. She had a quick mind and a genuine love of the subject she was studying, and in the presence of her teacher she found herself lit up in a specific way. The encounter with someone who knew more than she did, in a field she cared about deeply, produced an almost irresistible impulse to show what she knew. To meet the teacher at the level of the teacher, or as close to it as she could. To demonstrate that she was not merely a beginning student, but someone who had thought seriously about these things. Her teacher was a man who had been teaching for many decades and who had, over those decades, developed a very particular quality in the teaching room, an economy of words. He did not speak often. He asked more than he explained. He was comfortable with silences that other teachers found alarming. For several months the young student came to the teaching room and spoke. She brought her latest thinking, her new questions, the connections she had drawn between different ideas. All of this was real, and some of it was very good. The teacher listened. He responded briefly. The conversations were productive. But gradually the teacher began to speak less. At first the young student thought this was because she had covered the relevant ground, that she was reaching the frontier of what the teacher had to offer on these topics, and the silence was the sign of her having arrived at the edge. This seemed possible. She was making good progress. Then she noticed something. The teacher's economy of words was not uniform. It was specifically correlated with how much she had spoken. The days when she arrived with less, with a genuine question she did not already have an answer to, with a silence she did not know how to fill, those were the days when the teacher spoke most. When she arrived full, he was quiet. When she arrived empty, he was present in a different way. She tested this carefully over the following weeks. She came to the teaching room without any prepared demonstration. She sat. She asked a small question and then waited. And the teacher, in the space she had left, did something she had not witnessed before. He spoke at length. Not the brief, careful responses of the previous months, something more like the unfolding of a thought that had been waiting for somewhere to go and had now found room. What she heard in those sessions was different from what she had been receiving, not different in subject. The subject was the same as always, different in depth. It arrived in her differently. Not as new information about something she already understood, but as something that restructured the understanding itself. She had been going to the teacher to show what she knew. She had been receiving confirmation. When she went to receive what she did not know, she received teaching. She came to the teacher and named what she had noticed. "Yes," the teacher said simply. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because the telling would have filled the space the discovery needed," he said. "You needed to discover it from the inside, and you needed to arrive empty enough for the discovery to have room. And when I arrived full, she said, you waited? I waited, he said. The rain waits for the valley to be ready. It does not pour into a bowl that is already full. In Hindu philosophy, the relationship between the teacher, guru, and the student, shishya, is understood as fundamentally different from the relationship of information transfer. The guru is not a source from which the shishya downloads knowledge. The guru is more like the condition that allows the student's own understanding to arise, the clear sky in which the student's own light becomes visible. The concept of shraddha, sometimes translated as faith, but better understood as deep receptive trust, the quality of listening that goes all the way in, is the shishya's primary practice. Not the performance of respect, but the genuine interior quality of being fully open to what the guru's presence is transmitting. This quality cannot be maintained while the student is simultaneously demonstrating their own knowledge. The two orientations are incompatible in the same moment. The Bhagavad Gita makes this explicit in the teaching about the modes of approach to wisdom. You can acquire wisdom by asking, by serving, by surrendering the limited self's insistence on already knowing. The last of these is the hardest and produces the deepest receiving. The student who genuinely surrenders the need to be seen as already knowing creates the space in which the deepest teaching can arrive. There is also in Hindu teaching the concept of nada, the inner sound, the vibration that underlies all things and that can be perceived only in genuine stillness. The student who fills the room with their own expression cannot hear the nada. The student who becomes still can, and the nada that is heard in the stillness carries more than any instruction. Think about a teacher, mentor, or person of genuine depth in your life, and ask yourself honestly whether you have been arriving in their presence full or empty. Not empty as in unprepared, empty as in genuinely open, genuinely uncertain about what they might say, genuinely curious about what they know that you have not yet received. The quality of emptiness that allows the rain to land. Most of us arrive in the presence of people we admire with something to show. The update on our progress, the demonstration of what we have understood so far, the specific formulation of our question that already contains most of the answer. These are real things, and they are not wrong, but they fill the space, and the space, when it is filled with our own content, cannot receive theirs. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific failure mode of the advice seeker who presents their situation so completely and with such a clear direction of their own thinking that there is nowhere for the advisor's genuine contribution to land. The advice arrives, it is absorbed into the already formed understanding, and the person leaves having heard the advice but not having received it. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of asking someone for help while simultaneously being unable to let their help actually change anything, because the formulation you arrived with was already so complete that the help could only confirm or contradict it, and neither confirmation nor contradiction is the same as genuine reception. Right now, in this breath, there is no demonstration required. The night does not need to know what you understand. You can be here in the most complete emptiness, not the emptiness of having nothing, but the emptiness of the valley, which holds more than anything that arrives from a full place. What is trying to reach you in the dark cannot be received by a mind that is already full of the day. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught that genuine wisdom is not something accumulated, but something revealed. Not something you add to yourself, but something you find when you remove the things that were hiding it. The Tao is not located somewhere outside the person who is seeking it, waiting to be found and collected. It is the very nature of what is here, visible when the collection of acquired things is set aside. This teaching about the relationship between acquisition and wisdom appears in the Buddhist tradition as the distinction between panna, wisdom, and sankhara, the accumulated formations of thought, habit, opinion, and identity that obscure the clarity that is naturally present. The clarity is not produced by the practice. The practice removes what was covering it. The full cup is the image for the accumulated sankhara, the thought patterns, the automatic interpretations, the habitual responses that have arrived over a lifetime and that, in their accumulation, have made it difficult to see what is actually here. Not because the accumulated things are bad, most of them were appropriate responses to real situations, but the situations have passed and the responses remain, and the remaining responses now occupy the space that the present requires. In the Taoist understanding, the practice of wisdom is therefore less like addition and more like subtraction. Less like learning and more like unlearning. Not the emptying of a valuable thing. The tea is good tea, but the releasing of what was never meant to be permanent, so that the cup is available for what is arriving now. There was once a monk who had been accumulating understanding. He had been practicing for many years with genuine commitment, and the practice had produced genuine results. He understood more than he had understood before, not just in the sense of knowing more facts about the teachings, but in the sense that his actual experience of living had the quality of someone who had genuinely worked at something and arrived somewhere. The people around him recognized this. He was considered one of the more accomplished practitioners in the community. But something had stalled. He was not getting less wise, or so it seemed. He was not undoing what he had developed, but the quality of the practice had plateaued. Each year was a refinement of the previous year rather than a deepening. He had the sense of someone who has arrived at a certain altitude and can see further than before, but cannot find the next ascent. He brought this to an elder, a teacher who had been practicing longer than the monk had been alive, and who was known for a specific quality that the monk found difficult to name. The quality of someone who did not seem to be carrying anything in particular, though they were clearly the most understanding person in any room they entered. "I have accumulated a great deal," the monk said, "and I cannot go further." The elder looked at him. "What are you carrying?" she asked. He began to list his understanding, the specific realizations he had arrived at, the particular qualities of perception that his years of practice had developed. The elder listened. When he finished, she said, "And how tightly are you holding all of that?" He was quiet. "Imagine," she said, that your hands are full of the understanding you have accumulated. Imagine you are holding it, carefully, because it is valuable. And now imagine someone is trying to hand you something new. He sat with this image. "I cannot take it," he said. "No," she agreed, "your hands are full." She paused. "And so the new understanding circles you, and you can sense it, but you cannot receive it, because receiving it would require setting down something you have spent years carefully carrying." "But the understanding I have is real," the monk said. "I am not wrong about what I know." "You are not wrong," she said gently. "The understanding is real and genuinely yours. I am not asking you to doubt it. I am asking you to hold it lightly, lightly enough that your hands are available for what is trying to arrive." She looked at him with something that was very still. "The deepest teaching I can offer you is not a new piece of understanding to add to your collection. It is a quality. The quality of holding what you have in a way that does not prevent you from receiving more." She paused. "The monk who accumulated and holds tightly will arrive at a certain altitude and stay there, maintaining what they have. The monk who accumulated and holds lightly will continue to rise, not because they are discarding what they have earned, but because they are not using both hands to clutch it." The monk returned to his practice with his hands, metaphorically, slightly more open than they had been. It was a small adjustment, almost imperceptible from the outside. But something in the practice shifted. The plateau he had been on did not immediately become a slope, but within months he noticed something he had not noticed in several years, genuine surprise. The quality of being shown something he had not anticipated, the specific freshness of the new. He had not lost what he had accumulated, but he had stopped using all his holding capacity to maintain it, and what had been unable to reach him in all the years of the full-handed holding began now to arrive. He returned to the elder some months later, not to report, just to sit. She poured tea. They were quiet together. After a while she asked, "What are you holding now?" He thought about it honestly. "Less," he said. "The same amount, I think, but held differently." "Yes," she said. "That is the whole of it, really, not what you hold, how you hold it." She looked at him with the quality of attention that he now recognized as one of the most valuable things she offered, the attention that did not add anything, that did not reflect his own image back at him, but simply made room. When the hands are light, the whole body is lighter, not because you are carrying less, because you have stopped bracing against the weight. He understood this in his body, not just his mind. He had been bracing against the possibility of loss, against the possibility that something he had accumulated might turn out to be wrong or partial or in need of revision. The bracing had cost as much as the holding, perhaps more. In the months that followed, what arrived in the practice was not dramatic, it was specific. Small corrections that the braced hand could not have received without defending, small additions that would have seemed threatening to the accumulated structure. The new things arrived because there was room for them. And the room existed not because he had emptied himself. He had not. It existed because he had stopped using the room to store his certainty about the contents. Buddhist teaching holds the concept of upadana, Clinging, grasping, the quality of holding on to what has been pleasant or useful past the point where it is still serving its purpose. The Dhammapada identifies clinging as one of the primary sources of dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, not because what is being clung to is bad, but because clinging itself has a quality of contraction that prevents the natural flow of experience from moving through. The Buddha's teaching on non-attachment is frequently misread as the teaching to not value things, to be indifferent to what happens. This misses the point. Non-attachment in Buddhist teaching is not indifference. It is the quality of valuing fully and holding lightly. The monk who does not value their accumulated understanding has learned nothing from their years of practice. The monk who values it so tightly that nothing new can arrive has also learned nothing. They have simply acquired a different kind of obstacle. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of the raft, which we have met in other contexts, the wisdom teaching that every teaching, including the Buddhist teaching itself, is a vehicle to carry you to the far shore. And the monk who has arrived at the far shore carrying the raft has misunderstood what the raft was for. The raft was not a possession, it was a means. And means, once they have served their purpose, are set down, not out of ingratitude, but out of the natural movement of someone who has arrived somewhere and is now in a different relationship with what they are standing on. Think about what you have been holding with both hands that was always meant to be held with one. Not everything. Some things require both hands, and holding them well is exactly right. But consider, is there something in your accumulated understanding, your habitual way of seeing, your long-held interpretation of who you are or what is possible, that has been taking up so much of your holding capacity that new things cannot arrive in your hands? The question is not whether what you are holding is valuable. It probably is. People rarely hold the worthless things with such care. The question is whether the holding is still serving you, or whether you are now serving the holding. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific tiredness of maintaining something you have long since outgrown, an opinion you formed at a different point in your understanding, a self-image that made sense at a certain age, a way of relating to a person that was accurate once and has since become a habit rather than a response to who they actually are now. You may have felt this yourself in the specific relief of setting something down, a position, a belief, an identity, and discovering that what felt like loss was actually the arrival of something that had been circling you, waiting for your hands to open. The new understanding that could not land while you were busy maintaining the old one. Right now, in this breath, the hands can open. Not all the way. You will carry most of what you carry forward, and that is right. But in this moment, in this breath, nothing needs to be maintained. The valley does not grip the water it has gathered. It holds it, lightly, in the shape of itself. And the water that is ready to leave leaves, and the new water that is ready to arrive arrives. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about a very specific quality of visibility, the quality of the person who is genuinely present without needing to be noticed. The sage in the Tao Te Ching does not perform their virtue. They do not dress their practice in the clothes of drama. They are what they are without display, and the not displaying is itself part of what they are. The valley does not announce its fullness, it is simply full. This teaching runs against a very deep human grain, the desire to be seen, to have the inner quality recognized, to know that the work we have done is visible to the people whose recognition we most want. This desire is not wrong. Being seen is a genuine human need, and its absence is a genuine deprivation. But there is a specific form the desire can take that works against the very thing it wants, the performance of the quality that is being sought, which tends to produce recognition of the performance rather than of the quality underneath it. The candle that is held high so everyone can see it gives less light in any particular place than the candle placed in the low position at the center of the room, not because the candle has less fire, because the fire, spread across the large space, is thinner at every point than the fire that is given room to gather. The Hasidic teachers returned often to this teaching in their own idiom, that tzaddik, the righteous person, does not announce their righteousness. The announcement would be proof that the righteousness was, in that moment, being offered not as a gift, but as a claim. There was once a young scholar who believed his piety must be visible to be real. He was, in fact, genuinely pious. This is not a story about a hypocrite. His observance was careful and sincere. His study was deep. His prayer had a quality of authentic engagement that was not always present in those around him who went through the same motions with less invested in them. He was the genuine article. But he had developed, without quite knowing it, a practice of displaying the genuine article. The specific way he held himself during prayer was slightly more elaborate than necessary. His discussions of his study contained slightly more of his own understanding than the questions that had generated the discussion actually required. He arrived at community gatherings with a quality of formal readiness that stood out, not because he was performing at all, making visible what in others was simply lived. A Rebbe in his community, a man of very old age and very little fanfare, known not for display but for the specific quality of genuine comfort that seemed to arrive wherever he was, spent some time in conversation with the young scholar over the course of a winter. "You are afraid that if you are not seen, you are not there," the Rebbe said one afternoon gently, not as a rebuke. The young scholar was surprised. "I don't think that's what I'm doing," he said. "Perhaps," the Rebbe said. "Let me ask instead. When you pray in private, when no one is there to observe the quality of the prayer, is the prayer the same?" The young scholar was honest. "Not exactly," he said. "There is something about being seen that," he paused, "intensifies it." "Yes," the Rebbe said. "And does the intensification serve the prayer, or does the prayer serve the intensification?" This was a question the young scholar had not been asked before. He sat with it for a long time. "I think," he said finally, slowly, "that sometimes the prayer serves the intensification, that the prayer is an occasion for the quality I want to display rather than the thing itself." "Yes," the Rebbe said. He was quiet for a moment. "This is not a small thing to notice. Most people never notice it. He looked at the young scholar with something warm. And I am not asking you to stop being visible. The community needs people who live their piety with clarity. It is a gift. But there is a difference between the light that illuminates and the light that says, "Look, there is light." He paused. The candle on the windowsill, placed there to give light to the room, gives all its light to the room. The candle held up to show itself, to say, "Here is a burning candle," gives most of its light to the air around it, which it has already illuminated. And if I place the candle low, the young scholar said, will I be seen less? You will be seen differently, the Rebbe said, not by those who are looking for displays, but by those who are looking for warmth. He paused, which is also a different kind of being seen. The young scholar worked with this for many months. The adjustment was subtle. He was not trying to hide himself, which would have been its own kind of performance. He was trying to find the quality of presence that was simply what it was, without the additional layer of making visible. It was harder than the display had been. The display, once you learn to do it, is automatic. The genuine quality without display requires a continuous returning to what is actually true, stripped of the performance. But over time, he found something the Rebbe had suggested without quite saying. The genuine quality, expressed without display, reached further. Not because more people could see it, but because the people who encountered it encountered the thing itself, rather than the announcement of the thing. And what reaches the thing itself is not the approval of the observer. It is something quieter and more lasting. Hasidic teaching on the relationship between inner and outer expression holds a specific warning about the performance of piety, that the performance, if it is not carefully watched, becomes the substance. The person who began by displaying a genuine quality ends, after enough iterations of the display, displaying a quality that is primarily display. The original fire has been used up in the showing rather than in the burning. The Baal Shem Tov taught that genuine avodah, inner work, the work of the soul, produces a quality that is expressed not as display, but as radiance, something that simply arrives in the person who is near the genuine practitioner without being announced or pointed at. The person who is genuinely alive in their practice changes the quality of the room they are in, not by performing this change, but by being genuinely what they are. And the room, changed without being addressed, receives something it would not receive from any performance. There is also in Hasidic teaching the concept of the hidden tzaddik, the genuinely righteous person who is not recognized as such, who lives their righteousness entirely without display, and is therefore known to God and unknown to their community. This is held as a higher form than the recognized tzaddik, not because recognition is wrong, but because the hiddenness is the proof that the righteousness is not in service of the recognition. It is simply what the person is. The young scholar's discovery that the light placed low illuminates better than the light held high is this Hasidic teaching in its most honest, personally costly form. Think about the places in your life where you have been holding the candle high, not with bad intentions, with the genuine desire to be seen in the quality you have worked to develop, the competence you want acknowledged, the care you want recognized, the understanding you want witnessed. These are real things, genuinely earned, and the desire to be seen in them is a real and legitimate desire. But consider, is the holding high serving the light, or the light serving the holding high? And is the place the light is needed most the place that is getting it? This shows up in ordinary life in the specific exhaustion of maintaining visibility, the ongoing effort of being seen in the right way, in the right light, by the right people, and the specific, unexpected rest that sometimes arrives when you stop performing the quality and simply are it, when the caring is just caring, not caring while being seen to care. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of an interaction where no one was watching, where you did the kind thing or the generous thing or the honest thing entirely without an audience, and how that act felt different from the same act performed in full view, not more or less virtuous, but different in texture, more like what the thing actually is. Right now, in this breath, there is no audience. The night does not require your best presentation of who you are. What you are, in this moment, in the dark, with no one watching, that is actually what you are. The candle placed low, in the center of the room, where no one can see who placed it. Let it burn. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu described the best teacher as the one of whom, when their work is done, the people say, "We did this ourselves." Not because the teacher did nothing. They created the conditions, held the space, provided the light at exactly the moment it was needed. But because the teaching that took root in the students was so genuinely the students' own that the students cannot clearly distinguish between what they brought and what arrived. This is the valley's quality in teaching. The teacher who stays low creates the conditions in which the student's own understanding can arise and be recognized as theirs. The teacher who stands high, who is always visibly, unmistakably the source of what arrives, produces students who understand the material, but also understand that the material came from the teacher. And the understanding that comes from the teacher is held differently from the understanding that feels like one's own discovery. It is received and stored and can be recited, but it does not change how one sees. The understanding that the student feels is their own. That arose in the conditions the teacher created, but feels like a natural expression of the student's own thinking. That understanding does not need to be stored. It is present in the new quality of vision it has produced. It is no longer about the topic. It has become part of how the topic is approached. The Zen tradition has a teaching about this that uses the word mushin, no mind, the quality of acting without the self-consciousness of the actor, applied to teaching. The teacher who acts from mushin teaches without teaching, creating the conditions without claiming credit for what arises in them. There was once a student who tried to be the most impressive student. She was, in fact, very capable. Her mind was quick, her memory was reliable, and she had a genuine appetite for learning that was not performed but real. But in the company of her teacher, a quiet man of considerable depth and very little fanfare, she had developed the habit of performing her capability in a specific way, by being visibly the best student in the room. This had begun, she would have said, simply as trying hard. She answered questions quickly. She made connections between ideas. She came to each session with the previous session fully absorbed, and the implications extended further than where they had been left. These were genuine demonstrations of genuine capability. But the teacher, she gradually noticed, seemed most present, most alive in the teaching when she was not performing. In the rare sessions when she arrived genuinely uncertain, genuinely not knowing how to proceed, genuinely open in a way that had no performance in it, the teacher became someone different, more direct, more specific. The teaching came from a different place. She stayed after one of these sessions. "You teach differently when I don't know something," she said. The teacher considered this. "When you know something," he said, "what is there for me to do? Fill in what I don't know yet," she said. "And when you already know what I might fill in," he said, "I am filling in nothing. I am providing the performance with an audience." He paused. "I am a teacher because I have something to give. When you arrive full of your own demonstration, there is no place for the giving. The valley of your not knowing is what creates the place for the rain." She sat with this. "So I should pretend not to know?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "Pretending not to know is also a performance. I am asking for something more genuinely difficult than that. Arriving with the actual quality of not knowing what you do not yet know, not the performance of confusion, the genuine sitting with the frontier of your own understanding." "And the things I do know?" she asked. "Know them," he said, "but perhaps wear them a little more lightly when you arrive, not to hide them, to leave room for something beyond them to enter." He looked at her. "The best student I have ever had was someone who was genuinely less quick than you. She took much longer to understand things, but she never mistook understanding something for having understood all of it. She always left room at the edge, and because she left room, the edge kept moving. Years later, she is further than any of the quicker students, because she never stopped needing to receive." She returned to the practice with this image, the room at the edge. Not the full understanding, but the frontier of the full understanding, which is always available to someone who does not mistake the partial for the complete. And in leaving room at the edge, she found that the edge moved. Not quickly. The teacher had been honest about that, but reliably. What she received in the subsequent months was different from what she had been receiving. Not because the teacher had changed, because the space for it to arrive had opened. Zen teaching on the quality of the student holds Shoshin, beginner's mind, as one of the central concepts of the whole tradition. The phrase, attributed to Shunryu Suzuki, is, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." This is not anti-expertise. Expertise is not wrong, and the expert's deep knowledge is real and valuable. It is the relationship the expert has with their expertise that Zen is questioning. The expert who has forgotten that they began with beginner's mind, who no longer has access to the quality of genuine not knowing, cannot be taught anything that doesn't fit within the frame of what they already know. Every new thing is sorted into the existing categories. The categories become total, and what does not fit the categories is categorized as irrelevant rather than as interesting. The beginner's mind is not ignorance. It is the preservation of the quality of receptivity that was available before the categories hardened, available still to the expert who has consciously maintained it, who knows a great deal, and who knows that what they know is less than what there is to know, and who therefore arrives at every encounter with the genuine openness of someone who might learn something today that they had not known yesterday. There is also in Zen the concept of kensho, seeing the nature, the direct apprehension of what is actually here, which is described as arriving not at the end of a long process of accumulation, but in a moment of genuine emptying, not in the fullness of attainment, but in the gap between attainments. The valley, not the peak. Think about where in your life you have stopped being a beginner in the useful sense, not the technical sense. You may well be an expert in something, and the expertise is valuable, but the beginner's quality, the specific quality of encountering something as though for the first time, without the sorting into categories that expertise provides, without the quick pattern match that says, I know what this is before the thing has fully arrived. The relationship you have been in long enough to have stopped seeing your partner as someone genuinely new, and how long it has been since you were surprised by them. The practice you have been doing long enough that the motions are automatic, and how long since the practice felt like something genuinely unknown. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of a day when everything felt slightly new, when the familiar route to work looked different, when a conversation with someone you know well produced something you had not heard them say before, and the particular aliveness of that day compared to the days when everything is as expected. You may have felt this yourself in the return to something after a long absence, a place, a practice, a relationship, and how the return produced the quality of the first time, because the long absence had emptied the familiarity. The familiar seen with fresh eyes is a gift that only the emptying can give. Right now, in this breath, this moment is new. Whatever the accumulated expertise of your living has made familiar, this specific moment, this breath, this temperature, this quality of dark, is the first time this particular combination of things has existed. The valley does not remember the last time the rain arrived and compare it to this rain. It simply receives this rain, this breath, this moment. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that great music contains space, that the highest art is not the fullest, not the most elaborate, not the most demonstrably difficult, but the art that knows where to leave room. The room is not absence. The room is the place where the listener's own experience enters and joins with what the artist has offered. And the joining produces something that neither could produce alone. This teaching about the generative power of the space, the low place between the notes, the pause between the words, appears across all the great artistic traditions as the specific mark of mastery. The beginner fills every space, afraid that the space will be read as emptiness. The master leaves the space, knowing that what enters the space is more valuable than anything the master could put there. The valley is the space in the music. The notes are the mountains, visible, definite, unmistakable. But what moves you is not the notes themselves. It is the quality of the space between them, and what the space allows the notes to produce in each other. The note that arrives in a valley of silence rings differently from the note that arrives in the midst of other notes. The valley gives the note room to be heard. Celtic musical tradition holds this understanding in a very specific form, the art of the Stillness, the great silence, which is the pause that is not absence but presence, the moment between phrases where the music is not gone but gathered, and from which it returns with the quality that only the gathering can produce. There was once a young bard who always reached for the grandest note. She had been trained in the tradition of her people from an early age, and her voice was remarkable, a genuine instrument, with range and warmth and a quality of resonance that was unmistakably hers. She was, by any technical measure, accomplished. When she performed, people came and listened and praised what they heard. But an elder in the tradition watched her performances with something that was not dissatisfaction exactly, but not complete satisfaction either. He was a man who had been composing and performing for most of his life, and whose own work had a quality that the young bard found difficult to name. It was quieter than she expected in many places, and yet it moved people in ways that her louder, fuller performances did not. He left spaces. She did not understand the spaces. One afternoon he invited her to perform something new she had been working on. She performed it. It was excellent by the measures she had learned to apply, full, well-crafted, the voice deployed throughout its range, nothing left quiet that could be filled. When she finished, the elder was quiet for a moment. "Where do you want the listener to live?" he asked. She did not understand the question. "In the performance," he said. "Where is the space for the listener to bring themselves? Where is the room for what they are carrying to find itself in what you have made?" She looked at him. "I thought the performance was where they came to receive," she said. "The performance is where they come," he said, "but they cannot receive if there is nowhere to stand." He looked at her. "Imagine you are filling a house with your own furniture, every room full, every surface covered, every corner occupied. And then you invite someone to stay. Where do they put their things?" She saw it immediately. "There is nowhere," she said. "Yes," he said. "The listener who is given no room in the music cannot live inside it. They can admire it from outside, but it does not touch them, because there is no space inside it for the touching to occur." He paused. "Your voice is beautiful, and you are afraid that if you stop filling the space with it, the space will be empty. The listener will hear nothing. The beauty will be lost." "Won't it?" she asked. "No," he said. "What will happen in the space is that the listener will hear what your voice is doing to the silence, and the voice acting on silence is something the voice cannot produce in any other way." He looked at her steadily. The note played into silence sounds different from the note played into sound, not weaker, larger. The silence around it gives it room to expand that it cannot have when other notes are already there. She tried this in the next performance, left spaces where she had been filling. The first space was nearly agonizing to hold. She felt the gap as failure, as absence, as the moment when the audience would realize that something was missing. But the note that followed the space arrived in the room differently from any note she had played before it. It seemed to reach people, not all of them, but specific people who looked up in a way they had not been looking up, as though the note had found them in the space, which it could not have done while the space was occupied. After the performance, people came to her, not to praise the technique, which they usually praised, to say that something had happened during one specific moment, and the moment they named was always the moment after the space. She went back to the elder. They noticed the spaces, she said. They lived in the spaces, he corrected gently. That is different from noticing. Noticing is from outside. Living is from inside. Celtic musical and poetic tradition holds the concept of the siunas, the great silence, as not merely a technical element, but a spiritual one. The silence in Celtic music is not a pause between meaningful moments. It is itself a meaningful moment, one that carries a different quality of meaning from the notes it surrounds. In the Irish Willian pipe tradition, the ornamentation, the grace notes, the cuts, the crans, serves in part to frame the silence within the melody. The ornament is a tiny event of sound that focuses the ear on the note it precedes or follows, making the note's arrival or departure audible in a way that the plain note cannot achieve on its own. The ornament is, in this sense, a device for creating the silence's power. The Celtic understanding of the thin place, the place where the boundary between the visible and invisible worlds is nearly transparent, applies to music in this specific way. The silence is the thin place in the performance. It is where the music stops being heard as sound and begins to be experienced as something else, something that the ear alone cannot account for. And this quality is what people carry away from the performance, not the notes, which they may not remember exactly, but the quality of the silence between them, which they carry in the body. There is also in Celtic tradition the teaching of the Sianaki, the keeper and teller of stories, that the best story is told at half pace, with room for the listener to arrive in each moment before the next one. The story told too quickly runs past the listener. The story told with room finds the listener and takes them with it. Think about where in your life you have been filling the space that someone else needed to live in. The conversation where your eagerness to share left no room for what the other person was trying to bring. The creative work where the fear of emptiness produced fullness that blocked what the emptiness would have allowed in. The relationship where your activity, your plans, your solutions, your presence left no room for the other person's own quality to arrive and be known. The space is not failure. The space is the low place that allows what is trying to arrive to find its valley. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the most memorable conversations, and how often the most memorable part was something said in the quiet after a pause that could not have been said while the space was occupied. The thought that arrived only because the speaking had stopped long enough for the thought to form. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of being with someone who was comfortable with silence, who did not rush to fill the space between sentences, and how different you were in that company from the company of people who fill all the space. How much more of yourself became available when the space was given to you. Right now, in this breath, the space is here. The music of the day has stopped. The notes have been played. What is in the silence now, what is arriving into the quiet after the performance, is the thing the performance was trying to reach. Let it arrive. It does not need to be named. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not compete, and for this reason no one can compete with them. This is not the sage who is above competition by virtue of excellence, the sage who is so manifestly better than the competition that the competition is pointless. It is the sage who has stepped out of the dimension in which competition occurs, who is not in the field where positions are won and lost because they are in a different field entirely. The valley does not compete with the mountains for height. The competition does not apply to it. Its value is precisely its non-height, and the effort that the mountains spend on being high, maintaining their height, defending their position against the slow erosion of time. The valley spends none of this effort. It is simply itself. Low, open, full of what arrives. In the Ubuntu tradition, this teaching appears in the understanding that the most genuinely influential people in a community are often the quietest ones, not the loudest voices in the council, not the most forceful advocates for particular positions, but the people whose quality of attention and genuine care has been present for so long and so consistently that everyone in the community has, at one point or another, been received by them. They have made themselves the low place, and everything has flowed to them. Their influence is not a position they hold, it is a relationship they have. Nothing flows toward what refuses to receive. The person who competes, who is always establishing position, maintaining height, claiming territory, receives less than they produce. The person who receives, who is genuinely low, genuinely open, produces more than they claim. There was once a young community leader who raised her voice so all could hear. She had been given responsibility for a community that was genuinely complex, people with different needs, different ways of seeing, different histories that shaped what they could hear and what they could not. She was committed to the community, and she worked hard at the work of holding it together. She was not wrong about the difficulty. It was genuinely difficult. But she had developed a style that was producing an effect she had not intended. In the council, the gathering where decisions were made, she spoke early and she spoke loudly, in the literal and figurative sense. She was clear and she was consistent, and she was often right about the important things. The council made good decisions when she was in it, but something about the dynamic troubled her without her quite being able to name it. An elder who had been part of this community for many years and who had never, in all those years, held an official position of any kind, sat at the edge of the council and listened. His name came up occasionally, always with a quality of specific respect, not the broad respect of position, but the specific respect of, "That man once said something to me that I have never forgotten." She asked him, one afternoon, what he had noticed about the council. He thought about this for a while. "When you speak," he said, "the council listens to what you say, and then it decides." "Yes," she said. "And when you do not speak," he said, "the council listens to what you say, and then it decides." "Yes," she said. "And when you do not speak," he said, "the council—" He paused. "Is there a version of the council where you do not speak?" She thought. Not often. She usually spoke, and she usually spoke early. "When you speak early," he said, "what do you think the council hears from the people who did not speak?" She realized she was not sure. She had been the early speaker for long enough that she was not certain what would have been said before her. "I speak first so the conversation has direction," she said. "Yes," he said. "And does the conversation have direction because you gave it direction, or because the direction was already there and you were the first to name it?" She was quiet. "And if you waited," he said, "and the direction that was already there named itself, through the voices of the people who hold it, would you lose anything, or would you gain something?" She tried this in the next council. She waited. The silence at the beginning was uncomfortable. She could feel the expectation that she would speak, and the absence of her speaking registered as something unusual. But then someone else spoke, and then someone else, and what they said was different from what she had expected, not better or worse, but coming from a different place, shaped by a different experience, pointing at a different aspect of the thing they were trying to decide. And when she spoke, finally, she spoke to what had been said rather than to the agenda she had arrived with. And what she said landed differently than it usually landed. Not because she had changed what she thought, but because the council had already been building toward it, and her voice arrived as a completion rather than a direction. "The valley does not tell the water where to go," the elder said when she described this. "It simply receives everything that comes, and the water, in being received, finds its own level." She thought about this over the following weeks. She noticed other things she had not been noticing before. She noticed who in the council never spoke at all, and she began to call on those people, not with the forced democracy of the leader who is trying to be inclusive, but with genuine curiosity. And what those people said was, several times, exactly the thing that needed to be said, and that would not have been said if she had filled the space before they found the courage to occupy it. She went back to the elder with this. "Some of the people who never spoke," she said, "I didn't know they were there, not really." The elder looked at her steadily. "They were always there," she said. "The question is whether the room you occupied left room for them to be visible. And the decision we made this season," she said slowly, "the one I would have decided differently on my own. It was better for having all of those voices." "Yes," the elder said. "This is the gift the valley gives to itself. It is fuller because it stays low, not despite the lowness, because of it." Ubuntu philosophy holds at its center the principle that genuine community is not produced by strong leadership from above, but by genuine relationship from within, by the quality of attention and care that each person in the community offers to the others, which over time produces a fabric that can sustain weight because every thread has genuinely been woven. The Ubuntu understanding of Indaba, the deep dialogue of the Council, holds that the best decisions arise not from the strongest argument, but from the fullest hearing. The council that has genuinely heard all the voices, including the quietest ones, arrives at decisions that can be sustained because the decisions have been shaped by the actual reality of the community rather than by the most forceful representation of part of that reality. There is also in Ubuntu philosophy the concept of isithunzi, the dignity or presence that a person carries, understood not as a quality they impose on the community, but as a quality recognized by the community. The person of genuine isithunzi does not announce their dignity. The community recognizes it in the quality of attention this person has given over years to the people in their care. It is received dignity, not asserted dignity. And received dignity in the Ubuntu understanding is more durable than asserted dignity because it cannot be taken away by anyone who decides not to recognize it. The community leader's discovery that speaking last produced more than speaking first is this Ubuntu teaching in its most practical political form. The valley receives everything. The voice that receives everything is heard by everyone. Think about where in your life you have been establishing position when what the situation needed was reception. The argument where you were making your point when the other person needed to feel that their point had been heard. The meeting where your contribution was valuable and arrived too early, which meant it arrived before the space had formed that would allow it to actually land. The relationship where your strength, your clarity, your competence, your ability to see what needs to happen, has been taking up so much space that the other person has stopped offering what they actually see, because the space for it has been consistently occupied. Position is not wrong. Clarity is not wrong. The strong voice in the council has its genuine use. But the strong voice used constantly is the voice that stops being heard as genuine because it is always there. And always there means it is part of the background, and the background is not what changes people. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of having less influence than you expect in direct proportion to how much position you are maintaining, and the specific, surprising experience of your influence increasing when you step back, listen genuinely, and let the other person feel genuinely received before you offer anything at all. You may have felt this yourself in the conversation where you said almost nothing and discovered later that what you had said, the single quiet thing offered after genuine listening, had stayed with the other person in a way that your usual quantity of offering had never produced. Right now, in this breath, the position can rest. The valley does not maintain its position. It does not need to. Its lowness is what it is, and what it is draws everything to it. Let your body find its own lowest place, in this breath, in this dark. The position holding can stop. It is already enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the usefulness of emptiness, the hollow of the wheel, the space in the room, the valley in the landscape. None of these are valuable for what they contain. They are valuable for what their emptiness makes possible. The turning of the wheel, the living in the room, the gathering of the water. The emptiness is not a lack. It is the very feature of the thing that allows the thing to perform its function. For the fisherman on the water, this teaching appears in the relationship between stillness and abundance, the thrashing of the nets, the urgency of the pursuit, the continuous motion of someone who cannot afford to wait. All of this drives away exactly what it is seeking. The fish gather in the still places. The still places are the low places, where the surface of the water is flat and calm, and the depth is accessible. The Polynesian fishing and wayfinding traditions developed a sophisticated understanding of this quality. The value of the still, flat place on the water, which looks from the outside like nothing, but which the experienced fisherman knows is where everything is gathered. The emptiness on the surface is the sign of the fullness below. Applied to human experience, this teaching suggests that the most available form of genuine wisdom, the understanding that is neither forced nor performed but simply present, is found in the still, flat, low, apparently unremarkable place. Not in the urgent seeking, not in the thrashing of the nets, in the quality of presence that allows what is here to be found. There was once a young fisherman who kept moving his boat. He was not lazy, and he was not inexperienced. He had been fishing these waters since he was old enough to hold a line, and he knew a great deal about them. The seasonal patterns, the weather signs, the particular currents that brought food to different areas at different times of year. He used this knowledge diligently. When one location was not producing, he moved to the next likely location. When that did not produce, he moved again. He was efficient. He worked hard, but his catches had been disappointing for several seasons. Not terrible. He was skilled enough that even the poor locations produced something, but considerably below what he had been catching in his earlier years, when he had been less knowledgeable and considerably less active. An elder fisher in his community had been, for those same several seasons, consistently catching more. The elder was not younger and not stronger, and did not have access to water the young fisherman did not have access to. What she had was a quality the young fisherman could not fully account for. She seemed to spend a great deal of time doing very little. He came alongside her one morning when she was sitting very still in her boat on a flat, apparently unremarkable stretch of water. "Why are you here?" he asked. "There's nothing here." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "I've been through here," he said. "The current doesn't bring food here. It's flat." "Yes," she said, "it's flat." She looked at the water. "What does flat mean?" He thought about it. "No current," he said. "No movement." "No disturbance," she said. "The water below is not being moved around, which means whatever is below has not been disturbed." She paused. The fish that are in the moving water are moving with the water. They are not below the surface, they are in the current. If I go to the current, I will find fish in the current, which is to say fish near the surface, which is to say fish that are also moving and difficult to catch. She looked at the flat water. The fish that are below the flat water are not in the current. They are below it, in the deep, still place, and they have not been disturbed this morning because no one comes to the flat water. He looked at the flat water with different eyes. So the flat water is the rich water, he said. The flat water is the low water, she said. Everything finds the low place. The fish find the still depth. The fisherman should find the fish. She looked at him. You have been going to where the fish look like they should be. I have been going to where they actually are. And they are always in the flat places. Not always, she said, but more often than you would think if you had been trained, as you were, as we all are, to go to where the activity is, where the surface is interesting, where something visible is happening. She was quiet for a moment. The most interesting things on the water are usually happening below the uninteresting surface. He tried this. He went to the flat, unremarkable places and was still in them. It was more difficult than moving. The stillness in his body and in his mind required more of him than the activity had. The activity was a way of feeling useful. The stillness felt like doing nothing. But the catches were different. Not every day, not dramatically, but consistently. The flat places held what the moving places had been disturbed of, and the stillness required to fish the flat places was a different quality of presence from anything the moving had produced. He came back to the elder after several weeks. The stillness is harder than the moving, he said. Yes, she said. The moving is the easy one. Anyone can move. Staying still requires something the moving doesn't. It requires trust that what you are looking for will come to you if you are genuinely still. And most of us do not have that trust, so we move. Polynesian fishing and wayfinding traditions hold a deep understanding of the relationship between stillness and abundance, stillness and knowledge. The experienced fisherman in these traditions reads the surface of the water not for what is visible, but for what the visible is indicating about what is not visible. The temperature below the surface, the depth of the current, the presence of the flat, still zones that indicate depth and stillness below. The Polynesian concept of ha, breath, the quality of being genuinely present in the body, is relevant here. The fisherman who is genuinely in ha is genuinely still, genuinely attentive, genuinely receiving the information that the water is offering through the senses. The fisherman who is not in ha, who is moving, planning, deciding in advance where to go, is operating from their own ideas about where the fish should be, rather than from what the water is actually indicating about where they are. There is also in Polynesian tradition the understanding that the sea gives most generously to those who approach with genuine respect and genuine receptivity, not as a supernatural transaction, but as the practical reality that the sea's information is available to the person who is genuinely open to receiving it and unavailable to the person who has already decided what they will find. The ocean, like the valley, gives what it has to the low place. And the low place in a person is the quality of genuine stillness that is not empty of attention, but full of it. Think about where in your life you have been moving when what was needed was stillness. The problem you have been actively working at, turning over, trying different approaches, returning to repeatedly, that has not yet yielded its answer. And the specific quality of the moments when the answer has arrived, usually not at the desk, usually not in the active working, but in the still place, the walk, the shower, the moment just before sleep, when you stopped moving toward the answer and the answer moved toward you. The flat water, the place that looks, from the outside, like nothing. This shows up in ordinary life in the relationship between effort and insight. The specific pattern that insight arrives not during the maximum effort, but in the relaxation after it. Not because the effort was wasted, the effort prepared the ground, disturbed the surface enough to deepen the search, but the actual finding happened in the still place that followed. You may have felt this yourself in the solution that arrived in the night, waking with a clarity that the day had not produced, with no additional input, simply the stillness having allowed what the activity had stirred up to settle into its natural arrangement, the flat water after the moving. Right now, in this breath, you are in the flat water. The day's movement has stopped. The current has moved past. The surface is becoming still, and below the still surface, something is gathering. The rest, the restoration, the slow deepening that only the night's stillness can produce. You do not need to go anywhere else to find it. It is here, in the low, flat, still place you have arrived at. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the Tao is found not in the dramatic heights, but in the ordinary places, in the kitchen, in the common exchange, in the quality of attention brought to the most unremarkable moments of a life. This is the valley teaching in its most personal form, not the mountaintop revelation, but the daily, low, unhurried encounter with what is actually here. The Aboriginal Australian traditions carry a very specific form of this teaching in their understanding of the hollow, the low place in the earth where the ancestors' voices are closest, where the visions come, where the country speaks most clearly. The hollow is not prestigious. It is not the high, visible place. It is the depression, the bowl, the place where the earth dips below the general level, and in that dipping becomes the gathering place for water, for animals, for the specific kind of listening that the high place cannot offer. The young person who goes to the high place for a vision is going to the place of overview. The young person who goes to the hollow is going to the place of encounter, and the encounter, in the Aboriginal Australian understanding, is the deeper knowing, not the seeing from above, but the being with, in the low place, where the country and the person are in the closest possible relationship. The valley is not the place of revelation. It is the place of recognition, the recognition of what was always there, now made audible by the quality of the low, still, open position. There was once a young person who had been going to the highest place to find visions. They had been doing this for several years, making the climb at significant cost in time and effort. waiting at the top in the cold and the wind for something to arrive. And things had arrived. Experiences of space, of clarity, of the particular quality of the overview that the high place provides. These were genuine experiences. The young person was not wrong to value them. But an elder who knew the country very well had watched the young person making this climb season after season, and had said nothing until one morning she met them on the path and asked where they were going. "To the high place," the young person said. "What are you looking for?" she asked. They described what they sought, the vision, the encounter with the deep country, the understanding that came from the place of height. The elder was quiet for a moment. "Come with me," she said. "I want to show you something." She did not lead them up. She led them down, below the path, through thicker vegetation, to a place the young person had passed many times without paying attention to. A hollow in the earth, roughly circular, where the ground dipped several arm lengths below the surrounding level. Trees grew at its edges, and the air inside it had a different quality from the air above. "Sit here," the elder said. The young person sat. The hollow was different, quieter than they expected, even though they were lower. The sound of the wind above was audible, but did not reach them. The quality of the air was different. The quality of the ground under them was different, wetter, richer. "What do you notice?" the elder asked. "It's quiet here," the young person said. "And closer. Everything feels closer." "Yes," the elder said. "At the high place, you are above the country. You can see it. But seeing is one thing, and being in is another." She sat beside them. "The country speaks in the hollows, not because the hollows are better than the heights. The heights have their own teaching, but because the hollow is where the sound gathers. Sound moves down as water moves down. The hollow collects the sound the way it collects the water. The visions that come from height are visions of extent," the elder said. "You see how far the country goes. You see the shape of it." She was quiet for a moment. "The knowing that comes from the hollow is knowing of quality, not what the country looks like from above, but what the country is made of down here in the particular." She indicated the specific texture of the hollow, the way the roots of the surrounding trees reached in from the edges, the way the light came down through the canopy overhead, the way the earth held the warmth differently from the ground above. "This feels like where the country lives," the young person said slowly. "Yes," the elder said, "not the only place, but a real place, and a place that asks a different quality of attention from the high place, not the wide gaze, but the close gaze, not the survey, but the noticing." She paused. "Both are needed, but the vision from the hollow is the one that tells you what the country actually is. The vision from the height tells you its shape. Shape and substance are not the same thing." The young person began to spend time in the hollow, and what arrived there was different from what arrived at the high place. Not more dramatic, less dramatic. Not a view, but a quality. Not the country laid out below them, but the country pressing in from all sides, present in the specific, in the close, in the textured detail of what this particular place was made of. They brought what they found in the hollow to the elder. "This is the older knowing," the elder said. "The high place is recent. The hollow is where people have always come." Aboriginal Australian knowledge traditions hold the landscape itself as a living system of knowledge, not as metaphor, but as the literal understanding that the country contains and expresses the wisdom of the ancestors, and that the relationship between the person and the country is the relationship between the person and the ancestral knowledge. The concept of Gura, home country, the place that knows you and that you are responsible for knowing, holds that the deepest knowing of a country comes not from the overview, but from the intimate, low-level, sustained attention to the specific texture of things. The person who knows their country knows the particular species of grass that grows in the hollow, the specific quality of the soil in different depressions, the way the water behaves after different qualities of rain. This knowing requires proximity. It cannot be assembled from the high place. The Aboriginal Australian tradition of dadiri, deep listening, the quality of attention that goes below the surface of what is audible into what is felt, is specifically associated with the low, still, close qualities of the hollow. You cannot do dadiri from the high place. The wind at the high place is too loud and the view is too wide. Dadiri requires the close, quiet, still, low position, the position that allows the country to speak in its own voice, which is not a loud voice. There is also in Aboriginal Australian tradition the understanding that the hollow is the place of gathering, where water gathers, where animals gather, where the community gathers. The hollows in the country are its social places, its places of encounter, its places of concentrated life. Not the peaks, which are places of solitude and overview, the hollows, which are places of gathering and depth. Think about the hollows in your own life, the low places you have been passing by on your way to the high places. The unhurried morning that you move through quickly on the way to the important work. The ordinary conversation with someone you see every day that you give a fraction of the attention you give to the significant conversations with significant people. The specific texture of your own body in rest, which you rarely attend to because it does not seem to be where the important things are happening. These are the hollows, and the knowing that lives in them, the specific, close, textured quality of what your ordinary life actually is a different knowing from the overview. Not better or worse, different in kind, and often the kind that turns out to matter most. This shows up in ordinary life in the way that what you remember about a significant period of your life is often not the dramatic events that seemed important at the time, but the texture of ordinary moments, the particular quality of light in a certain place, the feeling of a specific conversation that did not seem significant when it was happening. The hollow had more of the real thing than the peak. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a moment when you were genuinely in the hollow, genuinely low, still, attentive to the specific rather than the general, and how much was available there that the high place, for all its view, could not offer. Right now, in this breath, you are in the hollow. Not the high place of the day's overview, the low, close, specific place of this body, this breath, this particular moment of rest. The country speaks in this place, not with words, with the quality of the close, the still, the dark. What is here is the older knowing. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught that the most enduring influence is quiet, that what lasts is not what impresses, but what enters. The teacher who enters their students does not always enter through the most impressive teaching. They enter through the quality of their genuine presence, which finds the small openings that the impressive offering often misses. The Mayan storytelling tradition holds a specific understanding of this, that the story told in the smallest voice is the one the listener leans toward, and in leaning is brought into the story in a way that the loud story, which the listener receives passively, cannot achieve. The small voice requires something of the listener. It requires the listener to come partway, and in coming partway, the listener has committed themselves to the story in a way that listening from a comfortable distance never produces. This is the Valley teaching in its narrative form, the story that is low, quiet, intimate, unhurried, creates a hollow in the air between the teller and the listener, and the listener's own attention fills the hollow, and in filling it, the story and the listener become something together that neither was before. The high story, the grand narrative, the impressive telling, gives the listener everything. It occupies every space, and the listener who has been given everything remains exactly what they were when they arrived, now filled with the impressive contents of the impressive story, but not changed, because change requires the listener's own participation, and participation requires room. The low space, the quiet voice, the story that asks you to come halfway. There was once a young keeper of sacred stories who wanted to tell the most important story. He had been learning the tradition of his community's stories for many years, learning not just the words, but the context, the significance, the particular moments when each story was right to be told. He was a genuine student of this tradition, and he had arrived, by many years of patient work, at the point where he held the most significant stories that the tradition carried. He had told these stories many times, in many contexts. He had developed a quality of telling that was by any measure accomplished. The voice pitched to reach the whole gathering, the pacing deliberate, the emphasis placed on the moments that the tradition marked as significant. But an elder woman who had been the primary keeper of these stories for most of her adult life, and who had recently passed this responsibility to him, sat with him one afternoon and asked him something he had not been asked before. "Which story do you find hardest to tell?" she asked. He thought. He named one, a story about loss and return, about what is sacrificed at the great turning points of a life that he found emotionally demanding. "Why?" she asked. He described what made it difficult, the weight of the material, the care required not to diminish what the story was holding. "How do you hold that care in the telling?" she asked. He described his approach, the particular way he held himself, the voice pitched slightly lower than usual, the pacing more deliberate. "And do you find that the people come toward the story?" she asked. He thought about this. The people listened, but come toward, he was not sure. "Let me ask differently," she said. "When you tell this story, are the people leaning in or sitting back?" He knew the answer immediately. They were sitting back. "And when I have told this story," the elder said, "do you remember how I told it?" He did. The elder's telling of this story had always had a specific quality. She told it as though to the person beside her, not to the room. Not with quiet negligence, but with a quality of intimacy that was audible, as though the story were being shared rather than performed. "The room leans in," she said, "because the story is not filling the room. The story is coming from a place in the room, from beside the person to my left, if I am lucky, and the room must lean toward that place to hear it." She looked at him. "The loud story fills the room. The listeners receive it where they are. The quiet story creates a center of gravity. The listeners move toward it." He tried this in the next telling. He pitched the story to the person beside him rather than the room. The initial discomfort was significant. He felt as though he were failing to give the gathering what they deserved by not projecting to the whole room. But something shifted. The quality of the silence changed. People moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, in his direction. And at the end, when the story was done and the silence was of the settling kind, he felt something he had not felt before in the telling of this story. The sense that the room had not been filled by the story, but had been entered by it, and that the people were not the same as they had been before it entered. He went back to the elder. "The small voice does something the large voice cannot," he said. "Yes," she said, "the large voice speaks to the room, the small voice speaks to the person, and the story that reaches a person, not a room, is the story that goes in." Mayan storytelling and ceremonial traditions hold the spoken word as a living thing, not a neutral vehicle for information, but a force that enters the listener and produces effect. The quality of the speaking determines the quality of the effect, not merely its content. A story told with genuine presence, in the right way, at the right moment, produces a different kind of knowing in the listener than the same story told badly or at the wrong time. The Mayan understanding of Kolkij, the sacred calendar, the cycle of days, includes specific days that are considered propitious for certain kinds of transmission. The timing of the telling is part of the telling. This understanding is not only calendrical, it includes the moment in a gathering when the right speaker's voice finds the right quality and the room shifts, and what was previously only being heard begins to be felt. There is also in Mayan tradition the concept of the ajkij, the daykeeper, the one who holds the ceremonial calendar and interprets the days. The ajkij is understood to speak with the authority not of personal expertise, but of the tradition they carry. Their voice is, in some sense, not only their own. And the most authoritative speaking in this tradition is often the most quiet, because quiet is the sign that the speaker is not adding their own weight to what is being transmitted, but allowing the tradition to speak through them as cleanly as possible. The young keeper's discovery that the story told to the person beside him entered more deeply than the story told to the room is this Mayan understanding in its most direct practical form. The large voice imposes, the small voice invites, and what is invited in goes deeper than what is imposed. Think about the difference between your public voice and your private voice, and where the things you actually believe live. Many of us have a voice we use in public contexts, louder, more polished, pitched to the room, and a voice we use in private contexts. And the things that actually matter to us, the understanding that is genuinely ours, the specific quality of what we know and feel, these tend to live in the private voice. The public voice can describe them, but the description is from the outside. The private voice carries them from the inside. Think about where you have been speaking to the room when what was needed was the voice pitched to the person beside you. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific power of the aside, the thing said quietly in a crowd to one person that produces a different quality of connection than anything said to the whole room. The conversation after the meeting, on the way to the car, when the speaking is genuinely private. The letter rather than the speech, the whispered thing rather than the announced thing. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of being told something quietly, as though to you alone, by someone who had access to a larger audience. The intimacy of it, the sense of being genuinely reached rather than generally addressed. Right now, in this breath, you are in the quiet of the private voice. The room voice has stopped. What remains is the whispered thing, the story told to the person beside you, which is to say, told to you, for you, in the dark, in the close, in the intimate. This is the valley's voice, small, directed, entering. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu closed the Tao Te Ching with a teaching about smallness, the small country, the small life, the small voice that does not strive to be large. He was not praising failure or urging diminishment. He was pointing at the quality of the person or the community that is not consumed by the project of expansion, that is genuinely content with the sufficient rather than endlessly reaching for the more. This is the valley's final teaching, that the valley is not trying to become a mountain. It is complete in its lowness. And in being complete in its lowness, it holds what the mountain cannot hold, the gathered water, the accumulated life, the fullness that only the low place can receive. The Norse tradition holds a version of this teaching in the concept of hygge, a quality of warmth, intimacy, and genuine contentment with the small and the near, which is expressed in the specific architecture of the long hall, where the fire is at the center, the people are gathered close, and the stories are told in the firelight to the faces of those who are actually present, not to the distant, not to the absent, not to the imagined future audience, to the people in this hall, tonight, with this fire. The skald who performs in the great hall for a distant king is performing height. The elder who tells a story to the circle of faces around the fire is practicing the valley. And what the circle receives is different from what the distant court receives, not because the story is different, but because the quality of the telling is aimed at the specific human warmth of the gathered near. There was once a young skald who performed loudly. He was genuinely gifted. The voice was good, the memory was extraordinary, and the craft of composition that his tradition required was, in him, a genuine art. He had trained for many years. He had arrived, relatively young, at a level of accomplishment that allowed him to perform at significant gatherings for audiences that included people of considerable standing. This was success by the measures his tradition used. But a wise woman in a small community, known not for fame but for the specific quality of warmth that seemed to come with her wherever she sat, had heard him perform once and had asked him afterward a question that stayed with him. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. He was surprised by the question. "Everyone," he said. "The whole hall." She nodded. She did not say anything more, but the question stayed. Some months later, circumstances brought him to spend a winter in this small community, and he found himself one evening sitting around the fire with perhaps a dozen people, and someone asked him to tell a story. He had the usual impulse to perform, to pitch the voice to fill the space, to bring the full craft of the performance to this small audience. But the wise woman was sitting across the fire from him, and he felt, in that moment, the memory of her question. "Who were you talking to?" He tried something different. He told the story not to the room, but to the faces he could see, specifically to each face, moving from one to the next, speaking to each person as he came to the part of the story that was, he found himself feeling, theirs. The part about loss went to the old man whose wife had died that summer. The part about the unexpected gift went to the young woman who had been looking for something she could not name. The part about the home that is found rather than built went, somehow, to himself. And he let it go there, visibly, which was not something he had ever done in a performance before. When the story was done, no one applauded. They sat in the kind of silence that does not want to be disturbed by noise. The fire crackled. The wise woman looked at him from across the fire. "Now I know who you were talking to," she said. "He stayed in that community the rest of the winter. He told stories many times around that fire. They were not the grand performances of the large hall. They were something smaller and, he found, something considerably more. What he gave to each listener was not the generalized offering of the performer to the audience. It was something more specific, more aimed, more genuinely his. And what came back to him, in the conversations after the fire, in the quality of the silence during the telling, in the faces of the people across the flames, was something the large hall had never returned. Not applause, reception, the specific warmth of genuinely being received by specific people who were genuinely receiving him. "The small fire warms more than the large one," the wise woman said to him near the end of the winter. "Because?" he asked. "Because the large fire keeps you at a distance," she said. "The small fire lets you come close." Norse storytelling and poetic tradition holds the skald, the poet and keeper of law, as a specific kind of authority in the community, the one who holds the memory of the lineage, the one who can make a thing permanent by naming it in verse, the one whose words shape how the community understands itself. But the Norse tradition also holds a different kind of knowing, carried not by the skalds, but by the vulva, the seeress, the wise woman, the one who perceives what is hidden. And the vulva's knowing was characteristically intimate rather than public. She sat with people, She listened. She spoke in close, specific terms about specific things. She did not perform to the hall. She offered what she saw to the person who was ready to receive it. The Norse concept of seidr, the magic of the seeress, was understood as operating through connection rather than performance. The seeress who went into her trance in the middle of the gathered community was not performing for the community. She was making herself available to what was trying to arrive, which might be for anyone in the room, and which arrived through the quality of her genuine receptivity rather than through any act of will. The skald's discovery that the small fire warms more than the large one is this Norse understanding in its most personal form. The power that is aimed at a specific person from a genuine place of connection reaches further than the power that is broadcast to the general audience. Think about the size of the fire you have been trying to build. Some of us have been building fires large enough to be seen from a great distance, visible to the people who matter, impressive to the audience we imagine, adequate to the scale of what we feel is required. And the largeness has cost something, the specific warmth that only the small fire provides, the warmth that requires closeness, the warmth that is shared between a specific set of faces in a specific room. The large fire keeps you at a distance. The small fire lets you come close. And closeness, genuine closeness with specific people in specific moments, is what the large fire, for all its impressiveness, cannot produce. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the relationship you have with the people who have been closest to you for the longest time, who know you in the small fire way, who have been in the room with you when the performance stopped and the actual person was present. And how different that knowing is from the knowing of people who have seen your largest performances. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a moment when someone saw something in you that you had not shown publicly, something small, specific, and genuinely you, and the particular quality of being seen in that thing, not the applause for the performance, the quiet recognition of the actual. Right now, in this breath, you are in the small fireplace. The performance has stopped. The hall has emptied. What is here, in the dark, by the last small warmth of the day, this is the actual you, known by no one but here, genuine, sufficient, needing nothing from any audience. The valley at night, full. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight, we began with an image from the Tao Te Ching that has been waiting for centuries to be heard in the right direction. The valley spirit, which does not die, because its very lowness is what makes it the place where everything arrives. Through 13 chapters, we followed that image into many forms. We sat with a Sufi dervish whose cup was full and who discovered that the teaching he most needed was entering the room but had nowhere to land. We followed a Lakota chief who came down from the hill and found in the gathering place below the actual knowledge of his people that the overview could never provide. We sat with a Stoic student who arrived in every conversation with his conclusions already formed, and who discovered what became available when he learned to sit in the low place and let the ideas find him. We accompanied a Hindu student who filled the teaching room with her own demonstration, and who gradually discovered that the teacher spoke most when she spoke least. We watched a Buddhist monk whose hands were full of accumulated understanding, and who found that holding lightly allowed the next thing to arrive. We sat with a Hasidic scholar who believed piety must be visible to be real, and who learned from a Rebbe that the candle placed low illuminates better than the candle held high. We followed a Zen student who was trying to be the most impressive student in the room, and who found that beginner's mind, held genuinely, was what allowed the edge of her understanding to keep moving. We sat with a Celtic bard who was always reaching for the grandest note, and who found that the most moving music lives in the space between notes. We accompanied an Ubuntu community leader who discovered that speaking last from the low place produced more than speaking first from the high one. We went to the flat, still, apparently empty water with a Polynesian fisherman who found that the flat place was the fullest place. We descended with an Aboriginal Australian young person into the hollow in the earth, where the country spoke in a way the high place could not. We sat with a Mayan keeper of stories who learned that the quiet voice aimed at the person beside you enters more deeply than the voice aimed at the room. And we ended with a Norse skald who learned the difference between the large fire that keeps you at a distance and the small fire that lets you come close. All of this is the valley. All of it is the same teaching in 13 different forms, that what receives more than it claims receives everything, that what stays low draws everything toward it, that the fullness we have been seeking in the heights has always been waiting in the low, open, unhurried place we kept passing on the way to somewhere more significant. This teaching is not mastered once. The valley does not learn to be the valley once and then maintain the lesson. It is the valley continuously, moment by moment, in each new arrival of rain, in each new season's filling and releasing. The practice of the low place is a daily practice, the returning again and again to the quality of openness, of genuine reception, of not filling the space with yourself, so that what is trying to arrive can actually arrive. Some days this will be easy. Some days the cup will have been filling since morning and will need considerable emptying before the night can fill it differently. The teaching does not promise that staying low is effortless. It only promises that what arrives in the low place is different from what arrives anywhere else.